Hello, my name is Fire, and even though I haven't edited the previous 3 videos, and I have another one I want to record after this about Final Fantasy XIV, we are going to talk about the Dark Legacy Shannara Bloodfire quest, which is honestly a kind of an inaccurate title because the quest only actually starts in like the last 40 pages and doesn't get anywhere due to interference. So... yeah, we are going to talk about the middle book of this trilogy. And it's kind of funny, actually. I'm going to take those off because they're actually my old glasses because I broke my current pair. I have new glasses on the way, but those are too old, and they're effective for looking at short distances, but over time they kind of do tire my eyes out. Not as badly as my broken pair, though. Those I'm having a very difficult time keeping together because I don't have anything to like really hold them structurally stable. So they like to kind of sag apart, and then that really tires out my eyes. Anyway, all right, enough talk about that. And the first thing I kind of want to talk about here about Bloodfire Quest, though, is actually something that I kind of flashed back to when I was reading about towards the end of the second act. When who's the one trapped in the Forbidden? Is it Redden Omsford? And Kyber and Lesidil are prisoners, of course, of Tail Riverine, the Straken Lord. And of course, at the end of like the second act of the book, it's more or less the second act. There's not really like a proper 3-act structure in this novel itself, but it kind of feels like the end point of like a part of the novel. And that is when, of course, Tail Riverine brings the two of them into his presence, and he tries to extract the information about the location of Grianne Omsford. Of course, seemingly not understanding somehow, for some reason, that she probably is not still alive, which I always thought was a little confusing. But of course, at the end of that segment, Kyber fights a duel with him, and of course, it's sabotaged, and she loses. And I flashed back to when I first read this story, and I remembered that when I first read this book, I gotta stop saying that phrase, that I was actually, this is the first time, it was the first time I was ever mad at the fact that a character got killed in the story. And I was really, really mad that Kyber and Lesidil got killed in this story in such a pointless, meaningless fashion. Yeah, I just thought it was so frustrating back then, and I felt it again, and that's kind of why I flashed back to that original feeling, is because I thought it was just so frustrating and aggravating that she died, because I didn't really see the point in it. There was no purpose, it wasn't heroic, it wasn't meaningful, it just was. And I guess maybe this kind of goes back to my comments back in Genesis of Shannara, where I talked about how Terry Brooks seemed to be less influenced by Tolkien as time went on and more influenced by George R.R. Martin. And of course, I can't really verify whether or not the latter is true. I can only not verify, but it's much more obvious though that the former is true, that when he first started writing the Shannara series, he was influenced by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. But the sort of the mindless savagery that kind of like keeps getting pushed into the story is just so, it's so grating and depressing, and it makes me so much less. It reduces my desire to actually read the I have to read something. Sorry. Okay. It makes my desire to actually like read the books like diminish by the chapter, because there just comes a point where I kind of just get kind of tired of it all. It's like, no, I want to read a fun adventure story with dark elements, not a dark story with no adventure in it. Like, because that's what it feels like. Because I'll even point out here that all 3 books, because I've read the first chapter of the final book, forgot its name, off the top of my head. I've read the first chapter of the final book, though, and I noticed something, and that is all 3 books have a supernatural entity warning the heroes that maybe they shouldn't pursue this quest. The first book has Al-Anon, the Shade of Al-Anon. The second book has the King of the Silver River. And then, not even a couple of days later in the third book, the Grimpond, of course, from the Wish Song of Shannara, does the exact same thing. It warns Rayling Omsford. I think it's Rayling. They are basically indistinguishable characters except for their names. And I know they're identical twins, but that's not really the point, I think. I think the point is that they should feel like distinct characters, especially since we get their perspectives. And they just kind of don't. But, you know, the Grimpond, you know, like 3 days later warns Rayling that it's like, hey, you know, maybe finding Ray and Omsford isn't a very good idea. And it feels boring. That's the best way to put it. The writing feels boring because it's the same thing. It's like, I guess it's supposed to be I guess it's intended to be a story about the hubris of the main characters and their, you know, not listening to the warnings being given to them by, you know, a trio of supernatural beings. But it feels wrong, I guess is the best way to put it. It feels wrong that that's what the story is about, rather than about the adventure, than about the discovery, than about, you know, learning something new or discovering something new / old in the world of Shannara. You know, the whole idea that, you know, we go on this adventure to find the Elfstones and instead everyone just gets killed. It just feels so... It feels completely out of line with almost every single one of the other Shannara books on some level. You know, and it's not to say that they're... And again, I think I've made this point multiple times, but there's not to say there's nothing wrong with it. There's not to say there's anything wrong with having darkness in the story and having, you know, characters die and having suffering and struggling or anything. Some of the best stories, I think, in the Shannara series have that. It's just that this series, this trilogy, feels overly focused on the suffering and on the failures without like any sort of redeeming qualities, without having any sort of gosh, what do I want to say even? Without like making the story worth... There's like nothing in the story that makes it worth reading, basically, is my point. There's nothing in the story that makes it like, okay, you know, there's lots of suffering, lots of death, but at the same time, there was a fun adventure to be had. There was fun discoveries to be had. There was something interesting happen. And honestly, it feels like nothing interesting's happening. That's driving me insane. You know, I feel like I'm actually getting this weird sense that it's like this whole story feels kind of pointless. In no small part because it's aping on prior Shannara tropes, like the death of the Elcris and so forth, but without really feeling like it's introducing anything particularly new or interesting. And that even feels wrong to say because there is things happening. The idea of Tail Rivering taking an army of demons and invading the Four Lands is an interesting idea, though it's taken us 2 books to get there. I didn't even realize it took 2 whole books before things actually started happening, which was a terrible, terrible writing decision on Terry Brooks's part. He spends way too much time on basically the build-up to the 3rd book, when it's like, no, things should have really started going in this one, and they don't. It's like you get to the end of the book before they actually start the quest for the Bloodfire, and you know, we spend all this time, you know, like 2 of the characters spend all this time in the Forbidding, and barely anything happens except one of them gets killed, and it's like, why did you write it like this? Why didn't you... Brevity. Where's the brevity? Where is the moving the story along so you can do more interesting things? You know, it feels wrong. And it's like, actually, like, it's kind of like pissed me off a little bit. Because it feels like I'm wasting my time waiting to get to the actual interesting parts. I don't mean the action, I mean just the parts of the story that actually are the actual parts of the story that move and actually get somewhere. It just irks me so much because I guess I remembered this story a little more fondly than or rather I remembered it a little more fondly than I should have, because I am so frustrated by it. I just want to I just want something to happen. And I know something's going to happen in the third book, and I know I'm actually going to like some of it, if my memory serves me correctly, but I'm also going to be deeply disappointed in the end because it's all going to be pointless in the end. And I just find that so irritating. I actually have, when I go on the final video about this trilogy, I'm actually going to have some ideas of how it could have been done better, because because they've honestly been percolating in my mind for a while now, actually, since all the way back since like I was like doing the heritage reviews. That's how long these ideas have been percolating, and finally at the stage where I can talk about them. And I'm a little bit excited for it, honestly, but I mean, it's not going to matter in the end because I am not the author of the Shannara series. But yeah, no, I just have a lot of burgeoning frustration that kind of just came out. But then, of course, there's the world building problems in this story, because, of course, I have mentioned before that I very much detest the retcon of the Elcris. I don't like how Terry made her basically a super long-lived, magical entity, and basically changed it, and very explicitly states it in this book that she only lives about 500 to 1,000 years, and then and then we gotta rebirth her. And like that, I said, I think in the last review, I really hate how that destroys the mysticism of the magical creature. It completely destroys the mysticism of it, and it's very, very disappointing that he decided to go that route. But not only that, it goes back to my point that I made ages ago, that it turns Terry's elves into idiots, because in this book, we discover that, in fact, the Chosen, the caretakers of the Elcris, have a journal in their hut that details who every single Alesidil/Amarosian girl is who became the Elcris. They literally have a journal chronicling every single individual who has become the Elcris. Why do they not have this book in a place where it can be found easily? Are you kidding me? He literally made his elves stupid. Like, why is this, like maybe they don't open the book until they need it. That would be fine. That would make sense. But this journal should have the exact instructions as to where you can find the Bloodfire, where you can find Spire's Reach, how important it is to do this, and the why and the hows and everything. Because if anyone read this book, obviously you would have figured out that, hey, all the Elcris, all the girls who become the Elcris, are descended from the same bloodline. What? Like there's so much information here that would be so obvious that would need to be recorded, and it's just not there. It's just they just find the book by accident after like 12 hours. Like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, you can't make your civilizations this stupid. They don't deserve to live. If they are so stupid that they can't keep critical information that will stop everything from being destroyed, from being found every half millennium to a millennium. It kills me. It was like, when I read that, I'm like, wait, it's that explicit. Like, this information's that explicit, and you're telling me that Terry thought this was a good idea? Like, good lord, man. No, that's not how that works. That was just that was so stupid. And this is why I hate the retcon, because it shouldn't have been retcon. But of course he retconned it so that he could have the Elcris die again, and he could repeat the story beat again. And it was just... it just irks me so much. it's just so irksome, because it just it tears down the overall Shannara series on a level, on such a deeper level than I think is like obvious at the outset. But when you really stop to think about it, you start to realize that, you know, his elves are stupid. And also there's of course the fact that when you really, really, really think about it, and I think it would make, I think this kind of becomes clarified in the third book, that the Elcris is actually like a deeply immoral thing, because of course if the Elcris has to be reborn every 500 to 1000 years, then that means that the Elcris has to be, you know, that means that, you know, that, like, you know, scores of young girls have had to sacrifice their lives and their futures for this, you know, to become this tree. And it loses, I don't know. If I remember, I'm obviously stretching into what really should be in the third review, but I've been thinking about this the whole time, which is that, you know, it's kind of vaguely implies that the Darkling creatures that got sealed away in the Forbidding actually were, you know, done dirty, basically. You know, not to say that they weren't in conflict with the fairy creatures of the Word or anything, but like there's something's not clicking here. And I think I gotta read the third book to be sure about what I'm thinking about it. But something feels super off about all of this. And I feel like, if my memory serves, Terry kind of scratches the surface on it, but he never goes the full distance in terms of like really understanding the implications of what the Elcris is, what the Forbidding is, who the Jarkarus are, you know, what the implications of the sacrifice needed to maintain the Elcris is. But I gotta see how he addresses it himself. Because of course everything's status quo's by the end of it, but I'm deeply irked by the fact that he status quo's it if he's going to, you know, create a moral conundrum, basically. So yeah, there's that. Ha 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 ha. I didn't expect to get so intense about that one, but that is what happened. Oops. But yeah, no, I'm very frustrated. This story was very frustrating in the grand scheme of things, and I just thought that I don't know. I thought that I would, you know, kind of feel the same way I did about Dark Legacy as I did when I first read it, you know, 12 years ago or whatever it was. And the more I read it, the more I'm like, oh no, this series, maybe it's not as bad as Defenders or Fall of Shannara, but it's kind of like Genesis, where there are very serious cracks in the storytelling and in the world building, and it deeply damages the overall quality of the story. Because something else that's also been bothering me since I started reading Dark Legacy is, and this goes back to Legends as well, is that the characters themselves are also written much more poorly. The characters feel super juvenile. They don't feel like grown adults who are trying to, or struggling to overcome challenges and sometimes break down, sometimes, you know, can't handle it. And they don't feel like teenagers, like, say, back in Elfstones, you know, a couple of teenagers who are being thrust into events that are far more difficult, you know, than someone that young might be able to actually sufficiently cope with. Though, let's be honest, in a medieval fantasy world, they have to grow up a lot faster. It's not like they're modern teenagers. It's not like Will and Amber were modern teenagers. They were a lot, you know, they were growing up in the medieval world. I think Terry understood that somewhat, which is why they were able to overcome the deeper, more complex challenges of, of dealing with being stalked by a demon and trying to reach the Bloodfire in time. But in this book, everyone feels a lot more childish. They feel a lot dumber, almost, is the way to put it. They don't feel like the kinds of people who are actually mentally fit. Despite the fact that many of them are druids, they don't feel like the kinds of people who are mentally fit enough to be doing things like protecting the world. They constantly behave in ways that are like more fit for immature modern teenagers than it does for people who have grown up in a tough and difficult world and thus are capable of being emotionally mature when they have to be. And I find that really frustrating. And again, I find that really frustrating because those kinds of characters, the kinds of characters that feel like immature modern young adults, immature modern teenagers, are not the kinds of characters you really want to be the protagonist of a story, unless that story is set in the modern day. And even then, you don't want those kinds of characters realistically to be the heroes of your story, because at the end of the day, they're not going to engender the same feelings in the audience that you yourself might have for them. And I find that aggravating. I feel like the only character, honestly, who is kind of like actually there are two characters actually I think who are actually kind of reasonably well written, because in the internal monologues, in the dialogue and everything, they don't spend excessive amounts of time whinging about their circumstances or how much the expedition for the Elfstones was a terrible one or whatever. Or Arlingfant, the sister of Aefinglo, who's of course the chosen, who's going to become the Elcris, where she kind of grows up and becomes more mature, and you kind of feel it. You kind of feel her. You kind of feel how she became more grown up and more mature, and it's actually written decently well. And then Cimrian, who of course is pining after Aefinglo, who of course was in a relationship up until the end of the first book, but he also is just generally, but he's also kind of a one-trick character in that he's just kind of generally mature, and he's not really like experiencing any character growth or development. He's just cool. He's just Legolas in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. But that's kind of it, and otherwise it's like every other character just kind of has their moments where they just don't feel like very mature individuals, or Terry seems to think they're mature individuals, but the way they act and behave isn't the same. I feel like the gnome tracker Skint, who I feel like is the last major gnome character in this, is ever going to show up in Shannara, by the way. But the gnome tracker Skint, he's supposed to be kind of this experienced but curmudgeon-y kind of character, and he just kind of feels like a snarky, 20-something character, and it doesn't feel the same. And then finally, there was something else that I've actually totally forgotten off the top of my head. Oh crap, that's not a good thing. Uh-oh. What was the last thing I wanted to talk about? The Druids. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the Druids, because I am noticing one last thing. Because of course, in this story, Terry killed off almost all the Druids. First of all, the Druids start off very weak, right? There's only half dozen of them. And before this story is done, everyone except Aefinglo and Saoirse, the dwarf druid, are dead. Not Aefinglo. Frack, what is her name? Why did I forget her name all of a sudden? Crap, I was just talking about it at the beginning of the video. That one, the Ard Reese. The Ard Reese, who I said I hated, got killed. This is telling you how much I really don't care anymore. Wow, this is embarrassing. But, you know, she's dead, and Bombax is dead, and, what's her face? The Plasia is dead, and Carrick is dead. That's 4 out of 6 people are dead. They're all dead. They're dead, Jim. And it made me realize something. Terry does not know how to write a story where the druids get to be strong. He doesn't know how to write a story where the druids are actually, enough not powerful, certainly reasonably strong. The only time he does is Defenders. And what does he do in Defenders? He makes the druids functionally irrelevant in the Defenders of Shannara trilogy, right? They basically are the background characters in a story that's about nothing. But where else? But what otherwise? What is the state of the druids in every other series? First King of Shannara, they get undermined from within and destroyed. The original Shannara trilogy, the druids are just Alanon, and they die at the end because Alanon dies. Heritage of Shannara, the druids do not exist until Walker Bow takes up the mantle. The Voyage of the Gerald Shannara, Walker Bow has not restored the druids, and he dies halfway through. The High Druid of Shannara, the druids are restored, but their strength is undermined by internal politicking. This series, the Dark Legacy of Shannara, the druids have not been restored sufficiently to a level of power, to a level of strength and power, and most of them die. Defenders of Shannara, that's the only time the druids actually have any power, and they're irrelevant. And finally, the Fall of Shannara, where the druids are first kinged again and undermined from within and destroyed. And it's just like, what's the point of having the druids if Terry doesn't know how to actually write the druids to actually be cool just once? Just once. Just one story where the druids are actually cool and actually get to be cool. You know, kind of like in Star Wars, where the druids and the Jedi are very pretty much parallel organizations. And in the prequel trilogy, we get to see the Jedi be cool. The Jedi get to be really cool in the prequel trilogy, and then they all get destroyed. And that was fun. That was fine. And Terry couldn't even give us that. He couldn't even give us one series where the druids get to be the prequel Jedi. And it just feels so lame. So much about everything I've been reading in Dark Legacy just feels super lame. And I wish it didn't. Because everything about Dark Legacy screams that it should not have been lame. Everything about Dark Legacy should have been like cool. It should have been game changing. It should have been world shifting. And it isn't. And I still have to read the 3rd book. And I'm going to get through it eventually, but I'm reading a lot slower because I'm a lot less engaged by it. But I feel so let down by it, and that's pretty depressing. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. You probably didn't, because there was a lot of me complaining about the book. And it sucks that I spent a lot of time complaining about the book, because because on some level I want to love it, and I just kind of can't. I find that disappointment very, very disheartening and very... Oh, you get it. I feel like I've been saying various iterations of that feeling for the entire video. So thank you for watching. And when I finally struggle through the last book, hopefully I will have these 4 videos edited and published before I do that. And until next time, everybody.